All right, thanks for joining me. And today we're gonna look at a $400 used PC that I bought on Facebook Marketplace. So we're gonna take a look, confirm everything, see what the performance is like, and then we're gonna tear it apart and see if we got our money's worth. All right, so let's take a look at this PC and see what we got. Stick with me. I'll be right back. All right, so the CPU is a 10400F, which is what was advertised. At 16 gigs of RAM at 2400 megahertz. I'm wondering if it's not overclocked currently. So we'll take a look at that. And then we've got a 512 gigabyte Intel SSD, and we got ourselves a NVIDIA RTX 3060. I believe it's a gigabyte version, but we'll confirm that once we start tearing it apart. It looks like we've got a gigabyte motherboard, a B560DS3H AC. And I think this came with integrated Wi-Fi, but again, we'll confirm that once we start taking it apart and taking a closer look. So let's install some stuff and do a little bit of testing on it, make sure everything's working the way it's supposed to. All right, so there's our gigabyte motherboard, Intel 10400F. Temperature's looking pretty good. At idle, it's at around 25 to 26 C. There's our RTX 3060. GPU's doing decent at 32 C. Hotspot's a little on the high side at 40 C, but I'm not concerned with that at this point, but we might have to take a closer look at that once we do some benchmarking. Let's start off with Cinebench for the CPU, and let's do the multi-core. All right, so had a couple of spikes at 52, but for the most part stayed below 50 for most of that run. And at 81, 89 score for the multi-core, that's within range of what I expected. We're not even gonna do the single core. The multi-core tells me more than enough that we're gonna be within range on the single core. Let's take a look at how it does on superposition. Let's try it at 4K optimized. All right, just under 53.5 FPS at 4K optimized. Looks like max temperature 66 C, and we had a hotspot at 84.5 C, but still not all that concerning since we maxed our overall GPU temperature at 66 C. And just remember, hotspots are usually spikes, not necessarily a concerning reading. All right, so it looks like everything's well within range and expected performance. So let's take a look at the BIOS and then we're gonna tear this thing apart. Okay, so XMP is disabled. We can get to 3200 megahertz or 3200 megatransfers, however you wanna read it. So we're gonna change that and see if we come in stable on the system. No reason to try to do anything with this since it's not an overclockable CPU. It's a 10400F. So we're just gonna save and exit and see if the RAM is stable. All right, so reading at 3200 megahertz for the RAM. So far so good. Let's run Cinebench real quick. Make sure that we're running stable. All right, about the same score, which, you know, kind of confirms what I've said before. I did a video on testing whether or not RAM speeds even matter anymore. You might want to check that out. We're running stable on the RAM at 3200 megahertz. So now we're just going to tear this thing apart and see what we've got as far as the condition of the parts. All right, so this screw is already loose for some reason. I want to say this is an NZXT case, I think. This just pulls right out. It's nubbed in, so right there. Cable management's pretty good. I want to say that this is possibly a pre-built system, mostly because you've got these numbered spots right here that guide a person into where to plug things in, especially considering the cable management right here. It's pretty nice and neat. I like the channels right here for cable management that ended up really not being used except for this channel right here, but there's another channel right here to get a better view right there. So yeah, the cable management is nice and clean. So I'm like 90% sure that this is a pre-built system. Not many people can cable manage like this. And there's that channel, empty channel I was just talking about, where it wasn't utilized, but then again, it wasn't needed to be utilized. So technically, I might have taken, so this is the 24-pin cable, I might have taken that and put it in its own channel right here. Right, so there's perforation right here on top. There was probably at one point like a small magnetic filter right there, but you don't necessarily need a filter right here, especially if this was for exhaust, which it is, because if you look, there's no fan at the top, so this is a natural exhaust point. All right, so there's our GPU, so let's take that out. Okay, 3-fan Gigabyte 3060. It's got some dust to it. I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up. So we're going to need to clean that up. But the fins look pretty clean. So, and the fans look pretty clean too. So yeah, not a whole lot of cleaning to do with this GPU. I've been getting lucky lately with used PC GPUs as far as cleaning goes and thermals go. Okay, so T-Force Vulcan Z 3200 megahertz CL16 from Team Group. 2 8 gig sticks, total of 16. There's a spider web in there. Get these securing wires out the way so I don't cut myself on those, but I'm sure I'm going to cut myself sooner or later on something. And as you can see, a lot of dust and goo on fan side, which was intaking. But it's pretty clean on the other side and the sides, so, and the top. So as far as the thermal paste goes, that stuff is bone dry. It's like a dust. Intel SSD. Can't imagine it's very fast considering the age of this PC and it being an Intel SSD, but it's 512 gigs. Can't tell if you can see it, but it is a Intel 10400F. I remember seeing a 2.5-inch SATA or a hard drive, a spinning hard drive in there, so I don't know what that's connected to. Alright. This fell out somewhere, which, by the way, there's more spider webs in the back. The power supply. All right, but in the meantime, anyways, sorry, I got distracted. But this fell out somewhere, and I'm not sure where it goes. It's a filter of some kind. And speaking of which, here is the back filter, or the bottom filter for the power supply. So yeah, that needs some cleaning. All right, here's the back plate. I almost forgot. We need to take this fan so that I can pull the motherboard out without hurting anything. Okay. There's the motherboard. It's pretty clean, pretty fairly clean. Don't like this case. It is an NZXT case, by the way. There's the logo. I don't like them anymore because of what they've been doing with their rental PCs. These channels and a set. And so there's that right angle SATA cable that was plugged into the motherboard, but you know, wasn't plugged into anything. So maybe the previous owner had a 2.5-inch SSD that was plugged into it, and then they removed it from this PC before selling it. So see, personally, I would have put it in the 24-pin right in this channel, which is what it was probably created for, right? And then you can use the wires for other things to channel through here. All right. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna have to clean up that power supply a little bit. And as you can see, or possibly see, there's some stain. It looks like coffee was, or soda was spilled right there. And some stainage right there. And we may or may not reuse that motherboard in this case. So just in case, I'm gonna just keep that back plate on there for now. All right, so let's talk about what we found. All right, so how'd we end up? Well, we didn't do too bad, and I'll get to that here in a little bit, but first I wanted to go through all these components individually and give them a value. And just so you know, I went on eBay and took a look at the average sold price, recent sold prices for each individual item to give me an idea what their value really is. All right, so let's start with the case. This is the NZXT H5 Flow. It's the older style version. And so in the back, there's this vertical channel for airflow with some ventilation on the back panel. And so you could potentially put more than just the one fan that it has as intake up here. And it's not bad right now because of the components. So you got the 10400F in there and then the 3060 in there. And so those TDPs aren't all that high relative to newer components. So if you had newer components with higher TDPs, I would be concerned with this airflow. I mean, there's not a whole lot of intake. It's very limited. And you could even put fans right here, but I don't see any holes for fans in here. So that might not even be a thing that you can do. But at the same time, I don't know that it would provide any better airflow because this bottom panel right here is all solid as well. And so I'm not a big fan of that. I do like the back panel where the motherboard sits on, because there's some channels in there that you could do cable management with and all that stuff, which is great. There's a couple of channels at the top that I really don't like because that could cause some damage to any wires or cables that you're running through those channels if you decide that that's not the channel that you want to use or the route you want to use for your cable management. And so it's really tough to get those out. I even think I slightly damaged one of the wires as I was removing the stuff from that particular channel. The exhaust fan only allows for a 120 millimeter fan rather than, giving you the option of 140 mil. You could put an exhaust fan right here at the top, or even an intake fan. An intake fan doesn't make as much sense, but you could potentially put a 240 mil AIO in here, but that leaves very little room for the AIO because of this bar right here that's supposed to be used to cover some of the cable management that's coming in from the back into the front of the motherboard. It just has a lot of limitations to it, and because of that, it doesn't have a huge amount of value to it. But on eBay, I did find one listing. It was the only listing for this particular H5 Flow, because there's newer H5 Flows with some porosity on the front panel and things like that, which is probably because of the things that I just pointed out on airflow, right? I did find one listing and valued it at $57. The CPU is the Intel i5-10400F, and the 400F series of CPUs for Intel are primarily made for pre-builts, right? That's how most of them are distributed and installed, is on pre-builts, which backs up my thought process overall that this was indeed a pre-built system. And it's not worth a whole lot. In doing the research, it looks like it's averaging about $56 for this CPU. The GPU is the Gigabyte Gaming OC RTX 3060. And this is a decent card, actually, and it's a good performer, and it has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So from a cost effectiveness standpoint and performance standpoint, it's actually not a bad GPU. And because of that, on eBay, it's selling for an average of $250. The motherboard is the Gigabyte B560DS3H AC, which has integrated Wi-Fi on it, as you saw earlier, which is nice, and it does have a USB Type-C header in there. And overall, the types and numbers of headers, like for fans and USB and stuff like that, is perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with it, and it only needs the single EPS connector on a motherboard like this because it only takes up to, I believe, the 11th gen. There's only one 4-pin 5-volt RGB header on here, and it's positioned in the top right corner right there. And so that could potentially limit you to the number of components that you could use that have ARGB, which might be the reason why the back exhaust and front intake fans were non-RGB, and the only RGB that you saw was on the Deepcool CPU cooler. And looking on eBay, the average value of this motherboard is about $65. The RAM, as I said before, is the Team Group T-Force Vulcan Z, 16 gigabyte at 3200 megatransfers a second. And DDR4 sticks, especially the 8 gig each versions at 3200 megahertz, they don't have a whole lot of value to them, and so their selling value is about $26. The NVMe, the Intel 660p 512 gig SSD, also doesn't have a whole lot of value. It is a 512 gig, whereas most PCs nowadays call for a minimum of 1 terabyte. And so there's nothing wrong with this SSD, but it is currently valued at about $26. The power supply, the EVGA 500BR 500 watt power supply, it is non-modular. There are things you can do with 500 watt power supply for your older PC builds or budget PC builds and things like that. So there is some value there, but not a lot, because, you know, once you start doing upgrades and stuff, you can't necessarily carry this forward into more power hungry builds because it's only 500 watts. And so the value of that is about 25 bucks. The Deepcool CPU cooler, I couldn't really find this specific model. Pure guesswork on my part. I don't see it being worth more than about 20 bucks. All right, so all told, we're looking at a total value of $525, and I spent $400 on this used PC. So I did get some value out of it, and am able to make a profit out of it if I decide to sell off the components individually. The better news is that if I decide to put these in different builds, especially like the 3060, I could put in a different build and put like a lesser value card in here, like a 2060 or something like that, or a 1080. And plus the CPU itself, the 10400F, I could potentially use in, so I did a video a couple weeks back where I bought a Dell PC that had an 11900 in it, and it was one of those smaller form factor Dell PCs, and I was thinking about taking that 11900 out and putting the 10400F in there, and because it's only got a 1660 Ti, so it doesn't really need an 11900. I mean, it's kind of a wasted CPU for that GPU. So yeah, there's all kinds of different things I can do to actually increase my profits and obviously create more content for you guys. But I'm curious to know what you guys think I should do with this stuff. If you guys have some great ideas, throw them out at me, and you know, maybe I could mix and match depending on what I've got versus what you're suggesting. Do me another favor and hit that like and subscribe button down at the bottom if you like this video, especially if you want to see more videos like this from me, because it does help out the channel a ton and it keeps me going. And in the meantime, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.